The Middle East is in such a state of flux, and I think what's quite interesting, I was reading a Bloomberg article about it, and sort of they're saying that the Arab states are scrambling because this could really unravel the Middle East even more. I personally don't think Trump's really going to hold out much support for the Kurds, unfortunately. Syria is a country that is cautiously optimistic that it's on the up now. The leader seems to be doing all the right things, maybe too many right things. How do you think that this could play out?
I think the Biden administration's plans to maybe double down more in Syria now that Russia and Iran are leaving Syria. I think the Biden administration wanted to build up more bases and send more troops. Like, we found out that we had 2,000 soldiers stationed in Syria instead of the 900 that they had been saying for the last few years. Right. Not certain. It just looks like, because we saw reports of convoys of U.S. supply trucks and logistics. They're bringing in all this concrete and they're helping set up inside Syria with the Kurds. Now we're hearing about potentially leaving parts of Syria, which is something that Trump has done in the past.
This is the Global Gambit.
How you going? So we are in the midst of quite a few conflictual developments. I know that probably isn't the right way to say it, but it sounds good in the sense that there are a lot of conflicts and there are a lot of things changing. At the time of recording, Trump is reiterating, going against the White House comments, that he wants to essentially turn Gaza into a sort of redevelopment project, arguably undoing months, if not years, of his own progress with the Abraham Accords in the Middle East. Simultaneously, he's making comments to such the extent that a report for the upcoming Munich Security Conference, it's a land grab, according to them, and he, at the behest of the United States, is now part of the same clan as, say, China and the Russian Federation in, using revanchism and sort of revisionist tactics to get what you want. Might is right is certainly back, it seems, and someone who knows much about conflict, war, and, a bit of task and purpose, drop the hint there, is Chris Cappy, who runs the great YouTube channel Task and Purpose, and someone who we've had on the show before. Chris, it's lovely to have you back. I don't know where to begin, really. What are you looking at when you see all these developments? What are you thinking?
Great to be back. Thank you for inviting me back on. I really appreciate it. These developments are, I think you could look at them in a few different ways. You could look at it like Trump is just doing a negotiation tactic. He's saying, listen, if the Arab world doesn't find a solution to the situation in Gaza, the Americans are going to come in and you're not going to like what we do. We're going to come in with troops. We're going to come in and basically turn it into a real estate development. And I think it could be, that's one way to look at it. It's a negotiation tactic to see if that can put pressure on Jordan and the countries, Lebanon, to take in refugees from Palestine. I don't know if that's going to work or not. It seems like the Palestinian people are definitely of the position that they're not going to leave and that they don't trust the U.S. government. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes, because what we're seeing, as far as I know, is that Egypt and Jordan have no interest in taking refugees, and also the Palestinians don't want to be refugees. So it's sort of, as it always is, like a lose-lose situation here, and your options are between like a really terrible situation or an even more terrible situation. I'd be curious to know what you think.
I think I do believe, to a certain extent, I've made some other videos on this in the past couple of weeks, that it is a negotiating tactic. So it's the sort of, show the stick, but don't necessarily use it. And as some people who I might not initially agree with did point out, and I guess they have a fair point, it did work in the case of Canada and Mexico. But this is the problem in of itself, right, Chris, which is that you shouldn't be using coercive measures against your allies and partners as a way to get them to capitulate or be incentivized to change behavior. Targeting the Egyptians and the Jordanians, who have been nothing but very consistent partners, Jordan allowing its airspace to be used by the Americans, the British, whoever, during those exchanges between the Israelis and Iranians last year. This is not the way to treat them. So I feel that there's a distinction there that Mr. Trump seems to be forgetting. And ultimately, and sort of I put the question to you again, though, isn't this just going to unravel all of the benefits, all the sort of progress he made in his first term, right? He wanted to be seen as the peacemaker, and the Abraham Accords, I think we can objectively say, was quite an impressive feat. But if he's going to put so many backs up with these moves, it's very counterproductive, no?
I think we will only really know for certain once we look back at this 5-10 years from now. So we don't know if this is going to be an effective negotiating tactic or not. This is more of definitely an aggressive foreign policy. It's a very aggressive way to treat your allies. We don't know yet if that's going to be effective, because there is a pro and a con to treating people that way, because they might not want to partner with you. Or another way to look at it is, this is, if you want to get things done, this is kind of what you have to do, and that the world isn't like a rosy place, and that you can't just trust everyone to do what's right. You have to put pressure on people. I don't know what is going to happen from here. I don't think anyone does, but if we keep going down the road that we've been going down, I don't know that that's effective either. So something that is really stuck out to me, I'm obviously not a super expert on like diplomacy, but something that I do know very well is security and national security. And when it comes to the security in Gaza right now, we're seeing something very interesting. I don't know if you saw this, but already there are American contractors that are being used to guarantee the peace and security in Gaza right now. So you can't say there's American boots on the ground, but these guys that are the contractors, I looked into it. It's open, it's public. They're former special forces, former Green Berets that are now, guys that are retired, that are now doing the security in Gaza and guaranteeing the ceasefire. And so I think when we put that in with what we're hearing about the diplomacy, is that, some people say it's absurd the United States could never go into Gaza, but I feel like we're kind of already there.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I certainly think we have been there to a certain extent. Oh, sorry, the Yanks, the Americans have been there already for a bit of time, in and out. I remember when they were developing that water bridge, if I can't remember the exact term for it, off the coast of Gaza.
Great.
Yeah. That was overseen by the carrier strike group, one of the carrier strike groups in the Eastern Med, wasn't it? So the US has been there in a sort of, should we say, operational sense, maybe not engaging in conflict, but that I still sort of, to rephrase it, I guess, what about the fact, though, that Trump has said more broadly, and I want to come to Ukraine in the latter half of, or second half of our conversation, because I think it's such a big aspect as well. But what do you think about this idea that Trump wants to reduce American, activity and presence militarily around the world, but at the same time he's saying that maybe America could administer the Gaza Strip and that they could retake the Panama Canal via force, right? These seem to be conflicting statements here, no?
Well, yeah, you could frame it as being conflicting, or you could look at it like, the way he puts it, I think, is peace through strength. And so you can't have peace without showing that you're willing to use your military. I think it appears to me like it would be a good thing if we pulled out of a lot of these places around the world. They're talking about potentially pulling out of Syria. Obviously, it would be a bad thing if we just left the Kurds without some kind of peace agreement there to protect them. If we just ditched our allies, that would suck. But, if we could find a way to leave Syria, to leave parts of Africa, without just leaving it like as a burning dumpster fire of a hellhole when we pull out, like I think that would be a very good thing if the United States military wasn't everywhere always. I'd be very surprised if the U.S. military was used in any capacity in Panama or in Gaza outside those contractors, which still find that fascinating. Like, instead of a UN peacekeeping force, it's private security peacekeeping force. Sorry.
No. Unpack it a bit more. It is interesting if you find it particularly sort of an aspect that we.
I mean, throughout history, we've always seen peace like it's guaranteed by a UN peacekeeping force, or it's guaranteed by a multinational Arab League would come in with all a different troops
Set
from
of
them, and
entities, yeah.
they would be in Gaza and securing it. So, I think ahead. I'm like, is this what the future of peacekeeping is going to potentially look like? In Ukraine, for instance, are we going to see like private security there? Because really, they're neutral in a way. They're more neutral than sending in a flagged nation. So I think there's a lot to think about in terms of we often think about private security as kind of it's a shadowy sort of nebulous organization that has a very dark history. And you think of Blackwater, you think of the Wagner forces, but then also there's a potential there for something with allowing, because Hamas and Israel agreed to it. Like they agreed to allowing American contractors and also some Egyptian contractors to come in and guarantee basically safe passage of the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who were displaced to the south. They need to go back to what's left of their homes in the north. And the only way that they can go back, Israel was concerned that Hamas fighters might go back with them, bring weapons with them. So the only way they were able to agree, both sides, on like, okay, let's let people return home, was through private security contractors. Because Hamas didn't want a flag nation there, and Israel probably wouldn't maybe potentially trust flag nations. But to answer what your question was, sorry, my ADD is all over the place, but I don't think that America is going to deploy troops to Panama, and I doubt that, until we see it. Trump says a lot of things, and then like, yeah, we have to seriously be concerned about that happening, but it sort of isn't happening until it is.
Yeah, I mean, sort of to tie it in with the political or diplomatic element of it, if you like, Trump in his first time, he did increasingly use PMCs, right? So how do you think that fits into his broader America First strategy second time around? Because he's a lot more self-assured in terms of what he wants to achieve, how he wants to achieve it. But indeed doing so in this rather unusual way, the privatization of sort of, shall we say, conflict management is certainly quite an interesting approach. Could you see that being problematic longer term?
It could be a good way to get out of jail free card. Like, oh, the United States isn't involved in these conflicts. It's private
Plausible
contractors
deniability, yeah.
are in Africa, in Somalia. Private contractors are in Syria. So yeah, it would be a good way to not seem hypocritical, and it's a popular choice for Russia. It's what they've done with their private security around the world. We've seen them use it in the same capacity.
Well, but PMCs often operate in grey areas, right? There's sort of what some people say are the shadow military, and they're often outside of the direct control of a traditional military command, as we saw with Wagner Group before it was absorbed, arguably, into the Russian Ministry of Defense. So how do you think Trump's use of these PMCs could impact the perception of US military authority and even its sovereignty abroad?
That to me is the big concern with using PMCs is, of course, that they don't their hierarchy doesn't basically feed up into, they don't answer to a government. They're not accountable for a lot of their actions. And those are things I would be concerned about. I don't know if we're going to see more of that I don't know if that's a White House change or why. I'm not sure. I'm not certain on that.
Oh, it's quite a moment when I ask a question to Chris and he's not sure on the answer. Oh, that's exciting. Oh, well, maybe not, because it's a bad topic. But I guess, the Middle East is in such a state of flux. And I think what's quite interesting, I was reading a Bloomberg article about it, and sort of they're saying that the Arab states are scrambling, right? Because this could really unravel the Middle East even more. I personally don't think Trump's really going to hold out much support for the Kurds, unfortunately. Syria is a country that is, I like to be cautiously optimistic that it's on the up now. The leader seems to be doing all the right things, maybe too many right things. I don't know. How do you think that this could play out
in Syria?
Yeah. Well, in sort of Gaza, but also the near abroad around there, because everything's a spillover effect, isn't it?
Well, so I've been looking a bit at how it's interesting in Syria to me, as far from like a security point of view, is that you sort of see the ship steering and turning in real time. You
Mm.
see the difference between the what the Trump administration wants versus what the Biden administration wanted, because the administrations changed around the same time. Like the government in Syria switched around the same exact time that the government in the United States changed. And I think the directive has sort of, I'm just looking at how things are on the ground. It seems like the directive has shifted from where I think the Biden administration's plans were to maybe double down more in Syria now that Russia and Iran are leaving Syria. I think the Biden administration wanted to basically build up more bases and send more troops. Like we found out that we had 2,000 soldiers stationed in Syria instead of the 900 that they had been saying for the last few
All right.
years. So I think the Biden administration, if they had been allowed, I think they would have kept doubling down in Syria, although I'm not certain. It just looks like, because we saw reports of basically convoys of
Mm.
U.S. supply trucks and logistics. They're bringing in all this concrete and they're helping set up bases inside Syria with the Kurds. And then now we're hearing about potentially leaving parts of Syria, which is something that Trump has done in the past. And so what we saw then was Turkey attacked the Kurds.
Mhm.
So it's very interesting to see a giant organization try to turn the ship, because it takes time. And so I think that's what we're seeing right now in Syria.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen in Syria, I think, could play out quite a lot for a lot of other countries. From my sort of geopolitical lens, I'm beginning to see what I feel is a sort of a bit of a power play between the Saudis and the Turkish. We saw him visiting both countries. I think a week ago, I made a video on it, I believe, and it was, indicative of a country that wants to re-engage, but is also not, ignorant of the fact it's a pretty battered state in between two aspiring regional hegemon powers. So yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting to see. I do want to ask you a bit more about the Iranian element in this. Obviously, Trump's sort of said that he wants a deal. The Iranians have said they're open to negotiate, but Benjamin Netanyahu is willing to go back to war with Hamas, and that seems to go. Are we going to see more conflict, or are we going to see breaking brokerage going on? Like, Chris, help me out here.
That's the $1 million question. Trump in the past, in his first term, was he pursued a strategy of maximum pressure against
Mm.
Iran. And I've always said that this is one of the main points of difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is foreign policy towards Iran, and the type of, basically, do you want the carrot or the stick approach? And it seems like they're going stick with Iran normally. That's what the conservatives have done in the past. So I don't know if that'll be their approach here again. Um, I personally would like to see them come to some kind of deal, some kind of agreement that avoids war or conflict. Um, I, I don't know what we'll see, though. I mean, the Trump administration the first time around, the major combat that we saw U.S. forces engage in was against ISIS.
Mm.
So I don't, you know, is it possible? Yeah, I don't know what steps would lead for conflict to happen, especially with Iran. It would. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm sort of, should we say, inhaling in an amused sense, because not because I find the topic funny, but because I can tell you're apprehensive to sort of say anything too categorical, which, to be honest with you, I agree with. I remember your video that you and the team did about the rise of war in 2024, right? We've seen a complete departure away from the idea of, the long peace, and sort of the idea that peace is holding, and the peace dividend, I guess, is sort of coming to an end, or has done. I'm very fearful, I have to be honest, for this year. I do wonder how much of a capacity the Iranians have at the moment. They're still supplying the Russians to a significant extent with the situation in Ukraine. They are trying to sort of leverage their relations with the Chinese and as well. But generally, they do look like they're in a pretty tough situation, a bit like we touched upon plausible deniability with the Americans, maybe using PMCs. The Iranians can't use that anymore. They tried to strike Israel directly. There is no longer that caveat they can work with. Plus, they've lost Hezbollah and Syria now. The what do you call it? The Shia Crescent, which goes from the Levant down into Iran. The way that Iran tried to control much of these sort of groups of people that were communities that they think are part of, they can sort of the Shia populations of Islam, has largely evaporated. So I am fearful, though, that means they have less to lose, almost, or that they sort of puts them in a tougher position, and therefore their backs against the wall kind of vibe. Plus, now with a much more bullish Trump and an Israeli cabinet that is just wanting to just go gung ho on everything, I am worried about the Middle East still being a hotbed. It might not be in Gaza or Israel specifically or Syria anymore, but there is still Iraq. There is still Afghanistan. We saw that situation between the Iranians and Pakistanis over Balochistan, if you remember, a few months ago in 2024, where they were, I think there was a mistake in communication and potential missile exchange. So there is always a hotbed down here. And then we can't obviously forget Yemen and the Houthis. So yeah, tough times there. But I guess the last question for you sort of on the Middle East of this area is, what are you looking out for from a military sense? Are there any developments from a technological standpoint? The Turks do look quite bullish in certain ways in terms of what they want to do maybe down there, exercise their military to acquire more land. I feel like all the bets are off the table in the sense of, using military force to reacquire territory. So I don't know. Do you have any
taking
vibes?
A chunk out of Syria. Everyone's just like taking a bite. Everyone, I was not expecting the Israelis to push into, what was it, Mount Hernan?
Further about, yeah.
Damn,
crazy.
Just like took a chunk, and then the Turkey as well. It's the Middle East to me has always been an enigma wrapped in a conundrum. Ever since I deployed there, I've not been able to suss out what will happen next. And every time I think I'm certain of what will happen next, it ends up going the opposite way. Like for the longest time, I thought, Israel is making friends with everyone and things are like chilling out. And then the complete opposite happened. The thing that over the past few weeks I've been looking at is just, the footage coming out of Gaza is heartbreaking. It's awful. You see the entire place just flattened. And to me, that has been disturbing to watch. Just on like a personal, in my professional, a lot of times you have to look at the combat footage, people dying, things like that. The footage now coming out of Gaza is, it's difficult to like digest that personally. The Middle East, I have no idea what is going to happen next. I have no clue.
No, I agree. I think that is a good point by which to, well, maybe not good, but certainly a point by which to end part one, because I think somewhere that you do have more experience, particularly firsthand, is when you visited Ukraine at the end of last year, and something I'm very excited to break down into with you in part two. So everyone, see you in part two. Bye.